scheduled to be on right now, as a matter of fact, is Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti. It's always good to catch up with the AG of the great state of Tennessee, and he joins us on the Matt Murphy Hotline to talk about events surrounding his office of late. Attorney General, always good to catch up with you. I hope you're well.
Doing well, Matt. Thanks for having me back.
Of course, the big elephant in the room, let's go ahead and tackle it, is the decision on the part of the United States Supreme Court to take up a case involving transgender surgery of minors. I think they had a variety of state laws to choose from. I believe that's right, and they selected the state of Tennessee. Explain to us why you think that is and what it means for your office and what you are doing in preparation of making these arguments before the court.
Sure. So this is a big deal. This is the first time that the Supreme Court's looked at the constitutional issues around gender identity. They looked at a statutory issue a couple of years ago, but everybody's been waiting to see what they're going to say about the constitutional aspects of it, and this is the first crack. So it's a big deal for our office. We are prepping already. I've got my Solicitor General, Matt Rice. He worked for Justice Thomas. He's a brilliant lawyer. He and his team are starting to gear up for this argument. We're going to go up there probably in November, maybe October, maybe December, probably November, argue the case. The briefs will be in before then. And it'll probably be June or so next year before we finally get an opinion out of the court. But this will bring so much clarity to the issue. I think they picked Tennessee in part because we have a brilliant opinion by Chief Judge Sutton from the Court of Appeals that will give them a lot to work with. I think that made the difference for us. I'm not asking you necessarily to argue the case in front of us, but what will that look like when you go before the court? Will it be you arguing the case, or will you select someone from your office to argue the case? How functional? I'm just very curious about how this works when you go up to the big court and you make the argument on behalf of the state and on behalf of the state's people. How does that work? So for this one, I hope to argue sometime. For this one, Matt Rice, my SG, is going to make the argument because he's going to have to spend a solid 3 or 4 months doing nothing but getting ready for this case.
Sure.
We want to make sure we bring our A-plus game to this. We're defending HB1, SB1, which our legislature put a lot of work into. It passed bipartisanly, protecting kids from these irreversible treatments. So we're going to go up there. I'll sit at the counsel's table. I'll have a couple other people from my office that have worked on it up there with me, and then Matt will do the argument. I expect the Solicitor General of the United States will be making the argument on the other side. This is a big case for the Biden administration, too. And I expect a very lively court. I think they're going to have a lot of questions about this. The arguments are going to be really about whether the Equal Protection Clause of the Constitution protects people from being treated differently based on gender identity. And our position is gender identity wasn't really an issue when the 14th Amendment was passed. It's a very new consideration. Mm-hmm. Our law protects kids from really serious harm, and we don't think there's any good argument to say it's unconstitutional. We think we got some pretty strong arguments, but of course, a lot of federal courts have come out the other way. This is going to be the first chance to really bring clarity and to establish a more stable and permanent legal rule going forward, because we're seeing so much litigation involving gender identity stuff. I mean, it's, the lower courts are all over the place. We're getting it in a bunch of different separate areas, and we really need the court to clear it up.
Well, one more functional question about the nature of the Supreme Court and how different it is from any other venue, and then I want to ask you a couple of specifics about the Tennessee law, but it's unlike anything else that you would do, is it not, Attorney General? I mean, because the 9 justices, it's my understanding, and I think this would be of great interest to the audience, right? As you are making your argument, or as your subordinate would make their argument for the state of Tennessee, the justices can interrupt and ask questions at any point, right? I mean, it's kind of a free-for-all for those guys to be able to pepper you or the other side with questions during oral. Is that not right?
That's right. And you're right up there, just a few feet away from them. So you're getting bombarded from 9 different people. All of them are, sharp. They have a lot of questions. They have good questions. They've got agendas they're trying to advance through their questions. So you got to really be on top of things when you go up there.
And from the perspective of defending this law, I mean, obviously, I feel like you are, I mean, you're well able. Your office is well able. Is the argument essentially that the health and safety of our minors has in a long-standing way, it's been kind of sacrosanct, and we're not going to do anything to damage that health and safety? And there are plenty of laws that have been on the books. I mean, for me, and I understand that the gender issue is a little bit new. I don't want to oversimplify it, but I think, well, despite what a parent might want, we don't allow 14-year-olds to drink because of the long-term possibility of health considerations. I mean, there are plenty of examples, right, that we could offer as to why we would not allow a minor to engage in a certain activity that we would allow someone of the age majority to do.
Yeah, I mean, you see that with tattoos. You see that with criminal justice system, right? Kids are treated differently because they're not able to appreciate the consequences of their decisions as much. And we're talking about decisions, even if it's just puberty blockers, there can be lifelong consequences there that the kids can't knowingly, intelligently consent to. So, we're going to be arguing probably a few things. I mean, we need to work really hard to craft exactly the right arguments here because it is such a significant case. But I think you can expect some conversation about how kids are different, how the government has a particular interest in protecting kids. The states have long regulated the practice of medicine, and that's what this is. And that, sex discrimination is different from gender identity discrimination. I mean, you're born a given sex. It's an enduring characteristic. The people who believe that gender identity should be a big factor acknowledge that gender identity is fluid. You can't look at a baby and know what their gender is. You can't look at someone and know what their gender identity is 5 minutes from now because it could change. So it's a very different concept than sex. And I think that's a significant factor for how the Constitution should treat it. But we'll see what the court says. We're going to be very, very prepared for this.
Attorney General Jonathan Skrmetti joining us today on the Matt Murphy Show on Supertalk 99.7 WTN. In other news, you issued a press release warning American Express, MasterCard, and Visa. I guess it was earlier today that you released this presser writing that you are concerned that the companies, quote, may not be taking appropriate measures to comply with new Tennessee law set to go into effect July 1st. Explain to us what that law is and why you are concerned that some of these credit card organizations might not be in compliance with it.
So to step back a little bit, every time you use a credit card, there's a merchant category code associated with the transaction. So if you shop at a big box store, there will be a code that says big box store. If you shop at a car dealership, there's a code for car dealership. They're very broad categories. A few years ago, some legislators tried to pass a law saying that there had to be a separate category for firearms merchants. It wouldn't have applied to all of them, wouldn't apply to like your Walmarts or your Bass Pros, but just stores that are more focused on selling firearms. Of course, that's not all they sell there. The legislation failed, so they went to the International Standards Organization in Europe and said, you should adopt a standard that says that there has to be this separate code for firearm sales because we can use it to track people who buy firearms. So they were trying to circumvent our constitutional legislative process by going to a European NGO. Well, we have a law now in Tennessee. Our General Assembly passed one saying you can't use that code here because it could infringe on people's Second Amendment rights. You're singling them out purely on the basis of what the store is engaged in. It doesn't fully capture everybody who buys a firearm. It doesn't fully capture everybody who's shopping at a firearm store because you might be buying a T-shirt or a tool or something else. So it's a very crude measure that really could cause a lot of harassment and financial complications for folks who sell firearms. So we've got a statute now that says you can't use that code. Well, without getting into specifics, we have some reason to be concerned that the credit card companies may not be able to comply with our law and may be, in one way or another, continuing to use the code after the July 1st date. These are big companies. They have the resources to comply with this. It's only fair for me to warn them because if they don't comply, they're going to have to deal with the consequences. So this was just letting them know we're watching them. This is an important issue. We have a law that our elected representatives passed, and we're going to make sure they follow it.
What would be the consequences? I don't want to presume that they're not going to follow Tennessee law, but if July 1 comes and goes and they are not in compliance, will customers feel any consequence of this, or will it be strictly between yourself and the companies? In other words, will we see any impact toward this if they don't comply by July 1st?
No, it'll just impact the companies.
Sure.
They're capable of complying. I think the letter should be sufficient to get them to comply. But if it's not, they're going to deal with the consequences themselves.
You recently joined other attorneys general in, it's a bi-coalition. I think there's 44 state attorneys general endorsing the Child Exploitation and Artificial Intelligence Expert Commission Act of 2024. That's a long way to say what? Explain this to the people of Tennessee and why you're in support of this.
Yeah, so AI has all sorts of possibilities. These are going to be great tools that can do a lot of good, but there's also all sorts of ways that people can use them to exploit kids, right? You've got deep fakes. You've got all sorts of manipulative techniques to try to persuade people to do things they wouldn't ordinarily do. There's all sorts of ways that AI could be misused, and kids are always one of our most vulnerable populations. And we have seen, for lack of a better term, creepy pedophiles take advantage of technology in the past to try to exploit kids. And I think it's really important that as AI develops, and we want it to develop, we need to be on top of this, because if we're not, China will be. But we need to make sure that as it develops, it's not being used to exploit kids, and there are appropriate safeguards and appropriate enforcement mechanisms to deter people from using it for that evil purpose.
And finally, before we have to let you go, Attorney General, I want to circle back to the decision on the part of the United States Supreme Court. And if you're just joining us, we're joined by Jonathan Skrmetti, Attorney General of the great state of Tennessee. And they took up the Tennessee case, or the Tennessee law, I should say, to present before the United States Supreme Court. What do you hope will be the outcome? Obviously, you believe in the Tennessee law. You believe that it ultimately will be decided to be constitutional. But do you think that this will provide clarity nationwide on what states are and are not allowed to do, or at least what we are allowed to do as our own state with regard to protecting our minors?
So there's a real question of how broad the decision will be. But at the very least, my hope is we would get a ruling that says states can protect minors from these irreversible consequences. It could be a broader case than that. It could address what the Constitution says about gender identity more broadly. We'll see where the court wants to go with it. But there are a lot of states that have laws like ours that say if you're a medical professional, you cannot subject a juvenile to these treatments that are going to have potentially lifelong consequences. We're certainly going to fight very, very hard to try to get the Supreme Court to rule that Tennessee's law is constitutional. I think we have a lot to work with. I think we have a lot of good arguments. You can never predict the outcome with the court. It's a whole different world up there. But, I want everyone in the state to know you are getting the very, very, very best that we can give. And there is a fierce group of extremely good attorneys that will be fighting hard on this.
And real quick follow-up on that, AG. So we saw where whistleblowers within the Texas Children's Hospital indicated in that state that there was still some form of hormone therapy or puberty blockers and other types of procedures being done on minor children despite the law there in Texas. I'd perish the thought that Vanderbilt Medical Center is continuing some of the treatments on minors against the law as passed by the General Assembly and signed by the governor. What authority does your office have to check behind Vanderbilt Medical Center? In other words, who's doing the checking to make sure that they're not doing procedures that they were doing previous to this law being passed, and now that it is against the law, who checks to make sure that they're not violating the law?
So there are health department oversight provisions. Private patients have the right to sue potentially. And then law enforcement has the ability to go in and look at it. Now, Vanderbilt University Medical Center is under a lot of scrutiny. It's been publicly reported that there's a Medicaid fraud investigation going on involving, the hospital, and their gender clinic has been getting a great deal of scrutiny. So it's my fervent hope that they're not doing that. If they're doing it, it will come out, and it will come out soon. There are a lot of different people looking at them, but I have no reason to think they are. I think, it's a institution that is trying hard to comply with the law, from every indication I have, but there are a lot of eyes on them.
Jonathan, is it fair to say that your office depends on the citizens of Tennessee remaining vigilant, especially when we're talking about medical practices, HIPAA law, and that sort of thing, that you depend on eyes and ears on the ground to make sure that compliance is being done, and if anybody sees something that they should obviously report to local law enforcement or even report it to your office? Is that a fair statement?
Yeah, or the Department of Health, which has oversight over some of this activity in the medical licensing. But yeah, I mean, we're not out there looking at everybody's medical visits. We can't be out there just parked in the clinics, in the hospitals, keeping track of what's going on. So we really need to rely on people who are identifying problems. And there are state institutions that do check-ins, do auditing, that sort of thing. But in a lot of these cases, it's whistleblowers or somebody at the clinic inadvertently talking about what they're doing in a public forum that's created the cases.
AG, thank you so much for everything that you do. You're a great attorney general. You're a great representative of the state of Tennessee. I know you'll do fabulous this fall arguing in front of the Supreme Court of the United States, and we appreciate you spending some time with us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me, Matt. Have a great day.